we keep this crap train rolling with more Dark Castle entertainment? Just kidding. I'm talking about that movie tomorrow. And yes, that is yet another guilty pleasure of mine, but tonight I'm going to talk about the other House of Wax remake, which had Vincent Price in it. A lot of people don't even realize that it is in fact a remake. The original was called Mystery of the Wax Museum, and the storylines to these two movies are a lot more similar than the ones which share the title of House of Wax. So to start off with what the original film did better, it honestly has a much better female lead character in it. Now, House of Wax has this female lead in it. At the beginning of the film, she escapes this killer after seeing him loom over the body of her best friend, and then later on in the film, turns out that she's the spitting image of his Marie Antoinette statue. And she is arguably a more realistic character than the lead from the original. She has more emotional moments, and during the final act of the film, she feels a lot more vulnerable, which, if you've seen the film, is for pretty obvious reasons. For those of you who have only seen House of Wax but not Mystery of the Wax Museum, though, this character was actually a combination of two different characters from the original film. The one who inspired the Marie Antoinette statue is only a supporting character played by Fay Wray. She is the best friend of the main character in the movie, who is this female reporter who's very fast-talking, constantly cracking jokes and messing around with people. She drinks, she talks back to men, and, for a female character in 1933, she was pretty far ahead of her time. And definitely a much stronger and more interesting character than the lead from House of Wax. I will admit that she's not exactly perfect, though. There is this sort of love triangle that they just cram into the end of the movie that doesn't make any sense. And I will admit that as I was revisiting this film, it had been a few years, and she was kind of getting on my nerves at first, but after a while I warmed up to her, and she is actually a really funny character. Even the way that she screams in the movie is hilarious, so if for nothing else, check out Mystery of the Wax Museum for that character alone. And now let's move on to the remake. For one thing, I'm not really much of a cinematography nerd, as I'm sure most of you well know. Typically, I judge a movie more at face value for how much it entertained me and how much I was able to take away from it in a single viewing. But House of Wax has much cleaner edits than Mystery of the Wax Museum. As I was rewatching it, I noticed that some of the cuts were a little sloppy. Like, there's even one point where it transitions to another scene while someone is in mid-sentence, and it feels much more B-grade in that manner, although I'm not really one to talk when it comes to editing. And then something which doesn't really have a lot of drastic changes, but just adds a couple of nice touches to the film, are the employees of the museum in House of Wax. They're pretty much the same as they were in the original. One character who really doesn't go through many changes is this guy who's dating Marie Antoinette. But both films include this mute character. I think he's a lot more physically imposing in the remake. When you look at his arms with the veins bulging out and everything, you can tell that he can mess a person up if he wants to. And then there's this other guy who is a statue maker, and when you're looking at him in the original film, you can just see the guy and tell that he's up to some shady dealings. In the remake, he doesn't feel quite as obvious, so, I like that. Also, they show a lot more of the killer in action in House of Wax, the guy who collects these bodies for the Wax Museum. In the original Mystery of the Wax Museum, you do see a couple of scenes where he's walking around doing something, but you get to see him doing a lot more in House of Wax, and he has more screen time. Also, you get to see a couple of his victims before they die, And something that's kind of fun about it is that, as is the case with a lot of older horror movies or a lot of episodes of Tales from the Crypt, his victims actually get what's coming to them. And then I mentioned that the lead character escapes from him at the beginning of the film, and the process by which she does this is a very long and suspenseful chase scene. And, the scenes with him are just more well done in House of Wax. Finally, I know that it sounds like I'm just kissing the man's ass at this point, but I prefer the way that Vincent Price portrayed the museum's curator in House of Wax. In the original Mystery of the Wax Museum, I also love the way that he's portrayed in that movie as well, but they're two different characters, basically. In Mystery of the Wax Museum, he starts off as a very warm character with a sense of humor, and then after the fire, he just becomes this very bitter old man who essentially has this everyone sucks but me attitude. He is constantly criticizing and putting down his employees, and he's not a very likable character. In House of Wax, he remains consistently likable after the fire, but he has the same kind of element as Frederick Lawrence from House on Haunted Hill, where you don't quite know what's going on in his head, and there are a few moments where Price just conveys through his eyes that there's something not quite right about this character. So, in the end, I think it's pretty obvious by now that House of Wax is a lot better than Mystery of the Wax Museum, but it's kind of like a symphony of horror versus Phantom der Nacht, where one version might be superior, but the other one does have some good things to offer, and I would certainly recommend you check out both of them. Watch them back to back this Halloween. Anyway, by the way, I just remembered, at the beginning of the video I mentioned that I was going to talk about the other House of Wax tomorrow. For the record, I will not be comparing it to the Vincent Price film. Instead, I'm going to talk about a movie that's more similar to, that it was originally supposed to be a remake of, but one that you may have never heard of. Anyway, that's all I've got to say about this comparison. I will talk to you tomorrow.